Welcome to Roadside History. My name is Daniel, and I'm here today in beautiful Hurricane, Utah. It's in southern Utah, just north of St. George and about 15 miles south of Zion National Park. I'm here today to tell you the story about the famous Hurricane Canal. It's a canal that was built upriver, up the Virgin River about 7.5 miles, and it was built to bring water into the Hurricane Valley so that 2,000 acres of arable farmland could be farmed. Families lived upriver in Rockville and Grafton. As you know from a previous episode, the town of Grafton had problems, as did Rockville, as did the town of Virgin. They constantly had problems with the flooding of the Virgin River every year. And so they wanted to make it possible to divert water off the Virgin River into the Hurricane Valley and off the Hurricane Bench. So they dreamed of a canal system. It was a canal system that was envisioned several years earlier. In fact, as early as 1873, people came into this area talking about and surveying and considering a canal. But it would never happen. It would be deemed impossible because of the difficulties associated with it. Essentially, you're digging through solid rock for 7.5 miles to make an 8-foot wide canal about 4 feet deep. Well, in 1893, two men had a vision, and they decided to put this vision to work. The two men's names were John Jepson and James Steele. One lived in Virgin, one lived in another town known as Tokerville. They formed and organized a canal company in 1893 with 100 men. These men were going to be granted stock in the company, water shares, and a parcel of land here in the valley so that their families could farm it. The work was incredibly difficult. Men were armed with pickaxes, shovels, wheelbarrows, and crowbars trying to work through this solid rock. By 1898, this was becoming something that was almost deemed impossible. Men were quitting. They were leaving. It was too hard. They couldn't work during the summer months because that's prime farming season, and of course the heat is incredibly hot. You're 105 degrees down here right now. So they spent their time working November through March when the growing season was at its slowest and the temperatures were at their coolest. They began working on this canal, and slowly, one by one, they would stop. By 1902, these men that ran the canal company knew that they needed more support. And so they petitioned the LDS Church and were granted $5,000 to buy the needed supplies and dynamite so that they could help complete the canal system. Only roughly 8 to 10 men finished the completion of this canal. But once the canal was completed and opened, it would bring water into the Hurricane Valley, hundreds of feet up off the bottom of the Virgin River floor into the Hurricane Valley, where 2,000 acres of farmland would then be grown.
In order for this canal to work, the builders of the canal needed a diversion dam. Upriver, in a narrow canyon known as the Narrows, a diversion dam was built. The dam was built multiple times and destroyed by flooding multiple times until eventually they got it right. The builders of the canal also had to drill through rock in order to make tunnels. There are 12 tunnels on the Hurricane Canal currently. There are also 6 trestles. These trestles would be used to carry water across canyons along the face of the hillside. When you arrive at the trailhead, you'll walk along a clearly marked trail for several miles, and there are several sections of the trail that you can hike. As you're walking, you'll notice that it would have been easy for the canal to break, and at times it broke, and they had to have ditch riders 24 hours a day that would walk up and along the side of the trail or ride their horses along the narrow sides of the trail to inspect the canal. Many times, people in town would notice a break and notice it and make mention of it, and they would fix it right away. But in the canyon area, there weren't people that lived up there, and so the ditch riders were necessary to make sure that the canal stayed viable. Often, they had to replace where water would break through the narrow sides of the canal, or you'd have small seepages that needed to be fixed. The canal section that has concrete on it today is a really strong section, but that concrete wouldn't be added until World War II, as I tell you a little bit later. There's also water cisterns, as you noticed a few moments ago, that are no longer in use that would store water so that people had that for drinking and other reasons. As you walk along the canal, you should be aware that there are rattlesnakes in the area, and you'll want to keep your eye on things just in case one pops up. In this particular hike, I didn't see any rattlesnakes. As you come in and across this trestle, you'll come to a tunnel. This tunnel you can walk through. There's no problems with that. You will be leery. There are some bats. On occasion, as I've gone through, I've seen bats. This trestle is made out of steel, and it replaced a wood trestle that were often used in the older times and earlier days of the canal. The tunnel itself is fairly safe and secure. Take a flashlight with you, but you can walk through this tunnel and see what it would have been like. Oftentimes, people who lived in the valley would rent tubes and float down this canal section to Three Falls Park.
The area that I'm standing today is a perfect example of the progression of the canal. As I turn the camera around and give you a view of the tunnel where the water would have come through, and then bring it around to this side where you can see the concrete and the steel flume. Back in the day, the canal was built with wooden flumes. Of course, as weather would come, it would get hot and cold, and wood wears as water runs through it. Cracks would form, breaks would happen. Patching these flumes was a constant. Canal riders rode the length of the canal every day. That's a 7.5 mile ride up and back. And then back another 7.5. They rode this canal every day to inspect it and make sure it was safe and that water was flowing like it should. After World War II, there was enough funding secured so that the walls of the canal could be improved from dirt. A lot of it is gypsum, and of course you get some lava in here and it becomes very porous. And so cracks and problems were happening frequently. After World War II, the money was secured so that the canal company could line the canal with concrete. And as I go back over this very creaky steel flume, you'll be able to see the concrete that would have been used to secure the canal and keep it from breaking as much. Of course, there were other problems. Falling rock. As you've seen, as I've walked up and down the canal, you've seen the falling rock in the canal. And that's a serious issue because it would plug up the canal, it would break holes. So the concrete really helped to secure that. We're not talking about small rocks. I mean, this rock in front of me here this is an 8-foot wide path, and that rock's probably covering 2.5 feet by 2.5 feet.
The significance of the Hurricane Canal riders cannot be underestimated. Larry Hutchings, the man you're seeing here, is one of many canal riders that would ride the canal, the narrow ledges of the canal, day in and day out. Carl Wadsworth rode the canal through the mid-1970s. Tragedy would strike the canal as one canal rider was bucked off his horse, a man by the name of Frank Lee. He received a punctured lung and sometime later passed away. His daughter Dixie Lee would be the only female canal rider in the history of the canal. Oftentimes, the workers of the canal would take a break and they dip themselves in the Virgin River or the local Pa Tempe hot springs, which is today located in between Laverican and Hurricane in the canyon of the Virgin River. The area that you're looking at now is Three Falls Park. That canyon that you see about the middle of your screen, you can see where the canal used to loop around, and there was a flume that would carry water to the other side of the canyon. Oftentimes, local kids would get in inner tubes and they would ride down the canal, and their exiting point would be here near Three Falls Park, and sometimes they'd make it through the tunnel there at the far end, which you can see at the middle of your screen today. The Hurricane Canal was a difficult project, and it took determination, grit, hard work, and forward thinking to make it happen. The men and women who created this canal definitely had those traits and qualities. A special thanks to Reuben Wadsworth for providing pictures for this episode of Roadside History. If you have a minute, check out his book, Red Rock Recollections. You can order that on Amazon. It's a great book. There's 2 volumes. Many stories of here in the southern Utah area. Thanks for watching, and I hope you'll join us next week for episode 2 of the Hurricane Canal.